Hey guys, welcome back. Now, it's no secret that the vampire movie genre is an absolute phenomenon that has generated billions of dollars over the years, with dozens of high-end productions telling the story of the bloodsuckers with some crazy, some uncanny, some unique and some highly interesting plot points. Now, while many of us have enjoyed the blockbuster hits of The Lost Boys, Interview with the Vampire and Blade, just to name a few, there's been a lot more failures than successes in the vampire industry. Now, some of these failures even ended up gaining a cult classic following from the overall creativity standpoint, but I'm not going to be covering those kind of movies today. I'm going to be looking at the really bad ones, and I mean really bad, so terrible that they make the list of the worst vampire movies of all time. I'm going to rank these movies by their suckiness, basically. No pun intended, so the list will get worse as it goes on, but that's what we want to see for this video, so let's kick it off with number 10, Queen of the Damned. This movie is bad, but it's more frustrating because of what it could have been. It's billed as a cinematic rendition of Anne Rice's classic novel of the same name, except it's not a rendition of Anne Rice's classic novel of the same name, it's a rendition of a complete mess. After the critical and commercial success of Neil Jordan's Interview with the Vampire movie, Anne's first Vampire Chronicles book, the next step for a sequel, and Anne's choice was to actually make the sequel, The Vampire Lestat. Instead, the studio, who held the rights of Anne's work until 2001, decided to merge The Vampire Lestat and The Queen of the Damned into one huge crap pile of a movie and basically ruined the cinematic credibility with Anne's literary audience. They left so many crucial parts out, omitted certain vampires, changed Lestat's vampire origin story, decided to give him mousy brown hair and brown eyes, when Lestat had blonde hair and blue eyes, excluded Akasha's own origin story, which is how the vampires came to be, and centered the plot around Lestat and Jesse. Louis de Pontelac was nowhere to be seen, and the only saving grace to this movie was Aaliyah's performance as Akasha. If you never heard of Anne Rice, her book, her work, and you watched this movie, then yeah, you think okay, it's watchable. It's watchable if you also didn't know it was set in the mid-80s where glam rock, tight jeans, big hair, and leopard print boots ruled the rock scene. Instead, they changed it to an early 2000s new metal scene where everyone looks like they've just walked off the set of The Matrix. Queen of the Damned is so bad because it takes so much of the good out of the movie that originated in the books. It deserves to be on this list purely due to the offense it makes to the original content. My rating, 4.8 out of 10. Number 9, the first Twilight movie. Now, I like Twilight, let me make that clear. I like the books, I like the story, I even like, well, 2 of the movies, but certainly not this one. Now, I'm not saying the movie is a mess in terms of its direction, it tells the story quite accurately, but wow, Kirsten Stewart's continuously awkward postures and facial expressions really makes her scenes hard to watch. Robert Pattinson, who I absolutely love and adore as an actor by the way, looks like he's constantly trying to calculate large sums in his head by the intensity of his stares. Either that or he looks like he's about to explode, especially when he reveals himself as a vampire to Bella, with the shot points making the camera appear like it's swinging from a rope. The camera panning super close to the actors' faces in certain scenes is really annoying, and the baseball scene where they all look like cats hissing is just absolute cringe. Here's a fun fact, well, not really fun, but it's a fact. The actors took feline classes to be able to perfect their hisses for that particular moment. It was only when I rewatched the movie that I realized how badly made it is. The story is not bad, but the movie could be remade so much better looking back on it. Even some of the effects seem over the top, especially when vampires make an entrance into the movie for the first time. The wind blowing in their hair, it looks like they're gliding across whatever surface they walk on. It's just not good. I look forward to the new TV show remake to see how they reapproach this story once again. My rating for Twilight, 4.3 out of 10. Number 8, Blade Trinity. This is a personal heartbreak for me because I love the Blade universe, I love everything about it, and what's so frustrating is they had the formula for a good Blade movie. They already had 2 blockbuster smash hits with Blade 1 and 2, huge commercial successes. Like, they knew what to do, they knew what worked, and they still managed to absolutely make a mess out of the 3rd and final installment of the franchise with Blade Trinity. Guillermo del Toro, who was crucial in Blade 2's development, passed on directing Trinity, which was a big blow to what should have been an epic climax to Blade's story. The initial story plot was loosely based on I Am Legend, which places Blade now living in a post-apocalyptic world after a mutated vampire virus engulfed the population. Blade was supposed to be living low due to his failure at initially failing to stop the virus outbreak. It sounds good, right? Of course it does. However, due to budget cuts, they went with Dracula's return instead. They took Dracula and inserted him into Blade, which derived from what made Blade, well, Blade. What's worse is that it didn't even matter whether Dracula was in the movie or not. He doesn't do anything but show his frustration over being awoken when he didn't want to be. He didn't want to be part of the organization that woke him, nor did he want to help Triple H and his D-Generation X vampires try to rule the world. Then he runs away from Blade and threatens to harm a baby, and it's just like, you're Dracula, you don't run away, you're the most powerful vampire of all time, why do you have to leverage a baby off a roof? It's just so bad, the whole movie is just terrible. I can't even say it's a recycled version of the first Blade because at least that has a decent plot line. Blade Trinity, awful. My rating, 4 out of 10. Number 7. Vampire in Brooklyn. Now, the trouble with this movie is that it doesn't have a clear enough direction on whether it's actually comedy or actually horror. It tries to be both, but the balance is so off, it's just a complete mess. Eddie Murphy is Maximilian, a Caribbean vampire who travels to Brooklyn in search of a woman who is supposedly a half-vampire. We don't get any backstory on Maximilian, but apparently he's the last vampire in existence for some reason that we don't know. The whole movie was an internal disaster due to Eddie Murphy, get this, refusing to come out of his trailer for certain scenes he didn't approve of, even though he approved of these scenes personally in his home before shooting began. A stunt woman even lost her life on set after she mistimed her fall onto an airbag, which resulted in a lawsuit from her family. Eddie Murphy wanted a more serious performance, while director Wes Craven wanted a more comedic feel to the Maximilian character. This is why we see Maximilian surrounded by comedy, but he just remains serious the whole time, which leaves the character hovering outside the actual intended feel for the movie. It's very apparent on screen. There was even reports of producers being told to try to trick Eddie Murphy into being funny in certain scenes, which is just bizarre. The plot is pretty generic. Maximilian's power as a vampire seems to come from his ring, which questions the integrity of vampire origins. It gained some popularity in the latter years, but overall, guys, it is a pretty bad movie. My rating, 3.8 out of 10. Number 6. 30 Days of Night, Dark Days. This is an example of a sequel that really didn't have to be made. I'll go one further and say it shouldn't have been made. The original 30 Days of Night was fresh, it had a decent plotline, and it had a different take on vampires. I loved the injection of the science behind the location in Alaska having no sunlight, and it's perfect for these vampires to thrive in. It had a conclusive, satisfactory ending. It didn't set the world on fire from a critical standpoint, but it was an entertaining watch. Then we were given this absolute pile of trash known as Dark Days. I kind of felt deceived at the beginning because the first 5 to 8 minutes were intriguing, until it wasn't. Lilith wants to head back to Alaska again, and then we have the vampire who retains his humanity and wants to destroy her, along with the plan to return to Alaska. It's like a plot to return to the first plot after the first plot didn't work for the vampires. Makes no sense. It lacks pace, it lacks surprise, there is no substance. The vampires lose all their mystique they had first time round, they don't even speak in their native tongue, and it becomes an all too familiar Blade rip-off at one point. The only reason this isn't first on the list is because the movies that follow are even worse. My rating for 30 Days of Night, Dark Days, 3.2 out of 10. Number 5. Ultraviolet. If someone came along and said, hey, let's take Milla Jovovich's character Alice from Resident Evil and combine it with Kate Beckinsale's Celine from Underworld, then that's exactly who you'd get in Violet from Ultraviolet. Genius behind the name. Absolutely no originality in the character creation. So the plot of the story goes like this. The vampire virus has mutated from its original super soldier strain and infected the Earth's population, and Violet, a non-infected super soldier, has to steal a secret weapon against a big, powerful arch-ministry corporation. I wonder what other corporation is quite similar to that. The vampires are called hemophages due to the virus rewriting their DNA. The movie is full of cheesy one-liners in the majority of action scenes, and overall it's a complete rip-off of the Resident Evil plotline, peppered with some Underworld-style themes. As I said, no originality. Milla Jovovich is very one-dimensional in this movie with no substance to her character whatsoever. The CGI is terrible. There's so many different camera angles in the action scenes that it's so hard to track what's actually going on. There is nothing appealing about Ultraviolet whatsoever, and as someone who really enjoys the odd directionless action movie full of over-the-top scenes and explosions and everything, this just wasn't it for me. My rating for Ultraviolet, 3 out of 10. Number 4. Dracula 2000. Well, we had to have a Dracula movie on this list, didn't we? Good old Dracula 2000 was released in the year, you've guessed it, 2000. Genius minds behind that one. I watched this movie more than once. I've actually watched it a couple of times, and I've got to be honest, every time I watch it, it's possibly one of the worst movies I've ever seen. It's just so bad. Gerard Butler, who I genuinely believe is a fantastic actor, takes on the role of the first vampire, and I can only describe his performance as Dracula on crack. He never seems to blink, his eyes are literally wide open in every scene he appears in, and his hair looks like it couldn't be displaced by a class 4 hurricane. In Dracula 2000, Dracula is taken from his imprisonment under Carfax Abbey all the way to America, where he's released from a sarcophagus and quickly comes across the reincarnation of Mina and Lucy, but Mina is also actually a Van Helsing. Heavily themed with the 2000s new metal look, no surprise there. Oh, and they also decided to make Dracula Judas. You know Judas who betrayed Jesus at the Last Supper? Yeah, they decided to throw that into the hat just for the sake of it, which makes absolutely no sense to me, and it's another case of Hollywood trying to force a religious-based betrayal onto the original vampire. I still can't get over that part to this day. It makes a mockery of the original story, and the plotline is just all over the place. My rating for Dracula 2000 is 2.7 out of 10. Number 3. Blood Rain. What can I say about Blood Rain? Well, I can say a lot, none of which is any good. This is one of, if not the worst, vampire movie ever made. I swapped it out of Top Spot numerous times because the final 3 movies are just so bad, but Blood Rain is truly awful. Oh my god, it's so bad. The action has no momentum or excitement whatsoever. It's chaotically edited, it's under-rehearsed, it's just trash, complete trash. It really takes ineptitude to a whole new level. As is the story, it never comes to life, and it is not easy to follow often. For something with the brilliant Ben Kingsley in it, I thought, well, it must be worth a watch, but man, was I wrong. This movie made only $3.5 million against a $25 million budget, which tells you all you need to know. If you're a fan of the video game, then you'll understand why the movie had so many subplots, but it just gets completely lost in them all, and it takes away from the main plot itself. Ryan and the Brimstone Society share the same goal, but obviously they have to throw in the guy who doesn't trust her or her rule breaking, but then learns to trust her, and they end up working together. It's just so predictable. If you haven't watched this, then I'd advise you to keep it that way. Hands down, one of the worst movies ever made, let alone vampire movies I've ever seen. It doesn't hold a 4% rating on Rotten Tomatoes for no reason. My rating for Blood Rain, 2.1 out of 10. Number 2. Dracula 3000. Just when I thought Dracula 2000 was awful, it's not even close to the 3000 version, because this time it's vampires but in space. Yeah, vampires in space. The spaceship is even called the Demeter, the ship that Dracula arrives on back when vampires existed on Earth, because now they live in space. Dracula is also called Count Orlok, who we know as Nosferatu. Coolio plays the role of 187, who's basically Renfield but enhanced to a weed-smoking brother from the hood. They basically took the Dracula storyline and combined it with Alien, thinking it would work. It doesn't. I turned this movie off twice midway through and I couldn't even finish it while researching for this video. I had to skip through and confirm everything with synopsis and summaries that I found on the internet. That's how bad this movie is. The dialogue is cheesy, the acting is cheesy, the plotline is so poorly written, which says a lot because they take the overall plot from a famous book, which has a good plot. I'm so glad this is the last time I ever have to talk about or mention this movie. If you want to waste 86 minutes of your life, then give this pile of trash a watch. My rating, 1.8 out of 10, and that's being kind. Number 1. Decadence Evil. This is my number 1 worst vampire movie of all time. It is truly terrible from start to finish. Even the trailer, which goes something like, "Evil lurks in the heart of the city, in a strip club owned by vampires." The voice actor makes it sound so serious, it's just laughable. It spends the first 4 to 5 minutes explaining the events of Vampire Journals, which is a better movie but not by much. It's actually better described as less worse than Decadent Evil. This movie took only 6 days to shoot, which really says it all. There's this part human, part reptile, part imp, who gets on the wrong side of his vengeful lover, Morella, who's trying to become this super powerful vampire, and she locks him in a birdcage. But by the end of the movie, she becomes a half human, half reptile imp like him, and they're getting it on in the cage together. God, it's so bad. In between all that is bad acting, cheesy scenes, one-liners that are so cringe I had to pause the movie because I just couldn't continue sitting through it any longer. I managed to finish it though, unlike Dracula 3000. It's just so bad. Like, I don't know how they made this movie thinking it would be well received at any standpoint. I can't even critique its direction, its pace, its plotline because they don't exist. If I could do any of you a favour, it's to inform you to never waste your movie night on this garbage. It is hands down the worst vampire movie ever made. There is a reason that it has no critique ratings on Rotten Tomatoes, because why would you even bother? My rating for Decadent Evil is 1 out of 10, and that is solely because the actors showed up. Guys, if you don't want to leave this channel just yet, then why not check out my ultimate Underworld playlist where I cover the life of Selene, Victor, William and many more Underworld characters. Or if you're into movie breakdowns, then I recently uploaded a video on Bram Stoker's Dracula from 1992. Stay here, keep watching, and thanks again.